Welcome to Geopolitical Digest for Sunday, June 23rd, 2024. Today we will cover the following Alex Christoforo's daily news update, then Alexander Mercurio's daily news analysis, then the Durand's take on the state of French politics in the face of recent elections, then Dialogue Works interviews with Larry Johnson and Jack Baud, then Danny Haifang's interview with Scott Ritter, then Cyrus Jansen's recent report on Malaysia joining BRICS, then Garland Nixon's musings on the unraveling of the U.S. empire, and lastly, Katie Halper's interview with Brianna Gray and Mark Lamont on the perils of public support for Palestinians in corporate media. Let's get started with Alex Christoforo's daily news update. Today's update, Cristoforo delivered an update that was both personal commentary on media integrity and insightful review of current political tensions. Cristoforo began by addressing the misrepresentation of Nigel Farage's comments yesterday in the Mail on Sunday, where he was falsely accused of being infected with quote-unquote Putinism. He clarified his stance, emphasizing that he had never supported Putin's administration and denounced the publication's dishonesty. His proactive approach to this defamation included legal action, highlighting the importance of accountability in journalism. It is important to note that at no time did Farage apologize for his statements, which Cristoforo applauded. Cristoforo's update then shifted to international affairs, specifically the response of the UK Foreign Ministry to threats made by Hezbollah against Cyprus. The UK statement, aimed at de-escalating tensions, denied the presence of Israeli military personnel on British bases in Cyprus. This diplomatic move was crucial in preventing Cyprus from being dragged into a broader conflict, underscoring the delicate balance of power in the region. The narrative continued with a discussion on the movement of U.S. aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean, hinting at escalating military expenditures and the financial implications of war. Cristoforo reported on a significant contract signed by the German military company Rheinmetall, marking the largest in its history, to produce artillery shells for various European countries and support Ukraine. This development served as a stark reminder of the lucrative nature of the defense industry and the economic underpinnings of military conflicts. However, Cristoforo is skeptical of the company's claims of eventually opening weapons manufacturing facilities in Ukraine, given the aggressive nature of Russia's bombing campaign of all things related to Ukraine's ability to wage war. Further complicating the web of international arms trade, Cristoforo touched upon a Financial Times report alleging that Serbia's ammunition exports were indirectly reaching Ukraine. This revelation pointed to the complex dynamics between Serbia, Russia, and the West, with potential implications for regional alliances and the arms market. Cristoforo posits that this could be a ploy of by Western powers to drive a wedge between Russia and Serbia, but admits the unlikelihood that such a gambit would be successful given the long historical, religious, and cultural ties between the two Slavic countries. The update concluded with a broader look at the Middle East, with tensions rising due to what seems like the inevitable conflagration between Israel and Hezbollah forces in Lebanon. The presence of U.S. naval forces further bolsters that fear that indeed such a war is imminent and that the U.S. will be forced to enter yet another military engagement. Cristoforo's reporting underscored the interconnectedness of global events and the importance of accurate, unbiased journalism in shaping public understanding. Now let's move on to the Durand's reporting on the French elections. In the wake of impending French parliamentary elections, a conversation between Alex Cristoforo and Alexander Mercurius sheds light on the tumultuous political landscape of France. The focus of the elections, intriguingly, is not on any candidate, but on the incumbent President Macron, who, despite not being up for re-election, has become the epicenter of political discourse. President Macron, often referred as a moron in the dialogue, is characterized as the most despised man in Europe, a sentiment that resonates with the French populace. The decision to initiate parliamentary elections, a move that was not necessitated, has been perceived as a catalyst for political chaos. This chaos is not only within the political system, but also within Macron's own cabinet, as depicted by a photograph capturing a palpable anger and disbelief of his ministers upon learning of the sudden electoral announcements. The conversation delves into the repercussions of Macron's decision, which seems to have alienated him further from both his cabinet and the international community. A notable incident at the G7 summit, where Macron found himself in a heated exchange with Giorgia Meloni over abortion rights, is indicative of his growing isolation. The image of Macron struggling to engage with other dignitaries, juxtaposed with Meloni's evident fury, encapsulates the president's deteriorating relationships on the global stage. Domestically, the political parties in France are in disarray. The traditional center-right party, Les Républicains, is embroiled in internal conflict, with its leader barricading himself in the party headquarters after a failed attempt to align with Macron's party. The left-wing parties, having formed a hasty alliance known as the Popular Front, are riddled with internal disagreements, particularly on foreign policy matters such as Ukraine. The, the interview highlights the irony of Macron's situation, his attempt to consolidate power and stave off the rise of Marine Le Pen's national rally has backfired spectacularly. Instead of uniting the center and the left factions, his actions have fragmented the political landscape, potentially paving the way for Le Pen's increased influence in the National Assembly. As the conversation between Cristoforo Mercurius concludes, it becomes evident that the French establishment is incensed with Macron. His actions are seen as self-serving, driven by a narcissistic desire to extricate himself from the political quagmire he has created without taking responsibility for the consequences. The conversation posits that regardless of the election outcome, Macron's legacy will be one of division and discontent, leaving a nation in search of stability and leadership. Now let's move on to Alexander Mercurio's daily summary of the news, especially in Ukraine. In his latest commentary, Alexander Mercurio delves into the intricate military developments in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The focal point of his analysis is the village of Rossena, where strategic importance cannot be overstated. Mercurio emphasizes the potential for Russian forces to sever the supply roads from Pokrov and Konstantina have a dire consequence for Ukrainian defense capabilities. The capture of Venka by Russian forces is underscored as a pivotal event in the conflict. Mercurio posits that this could lead to the isolation of Ukrainian troops stationed in Toretsk and New York, further complicating the already strained Ukrainian supply lines from the north. This development is not just a tactical victory, but also a psychological blow to the Ukrainian forces, as it demonstrates the relentless advance of Russian troops. Mercury also sheds light on the collapse of Zelensky's line of defense, a retreat that has led to the establishment of the Poroshenko line. The Russians' capture of key positions and their continued push toward other strategic locations signify a methodical and coordinated effort that has resulted in significant Ukrainian casualties. This aspect of the conflict is particularly harrowing, as it indicates a single-minded determination by the Russian forces to consolidate their gains. In the latter section of his report, Alexander Mercurio provides a granular view of the military operations on the ground. He reports that Russian forces have fully captured the aggregate plant, a significant development that the Ukrainian General Staff denies, but which Ukrainian soldiers in the area seem to tacitly acknowledge. This capture has completed the encirclement of the Ukrainian troops of the 71st Brigade, who are now trapped in the high-rise buildings north of the plant. Mercury also notes that there are no new advances reported in Volchansk area, but it is likely that the Russians have cleared the Ukrainians from the forested area in the loop of the Volchansk River south of the aggregate plant. This suggests a tightening of the Russian grip in the region. The report touches on the Ukrainian attempts to send reinforcements to the northern area of Volchansk, which have been abandoned after significant losses, including up to 5 men in one instance. The 36th Armored Brigade has suffered over 250 casualties and has been withdrawn from the front to restore its combat effectiveness. Mercurio raises concerns about the use of drones with chemical weapons, a claim made by Russian forces, which he cannot substantiate and therefore chooses not to discuss further. However, he does highlight the destruction of deployment points of the 13th and 3rd Brigades of the National Guard of Ukraine by Russian aviation, indicating a shift in Ukrainian strategy as they deploy internal security forces to the battlefield. The commentary concludes with a critical view of the Western policy in the conflict, particularly the decision to cross Russian red lines, which Mercurio views as a dangerous and provocative move. He questions the necessity of such actions, especially when initial measures were claimed to be successful. Furthermore, Mercurio touches upon the broader implications of Western policy in the conflict. He critically examines the perceived failure of Zelensky's peace summit and the growing impatience among Ukraine's allies. This sentiment is reflective of a larger trend of declining Western influence in global affairs, a theme that Mercurio explores with both insight and foresight. In conclusion, Alexander Mercurio's commentary provides a comprehensive overview of the current state of the Russo-Ukraine conflict. His analysis of the strategic military developments offers a sobering perspective on the complexities and consequences of war. As the situation continues to evolve, Mercurio's voice remains an essential source of informed commentary on this critical global issue. Okay, now let's move on to Dialogue Works' interviews with Larry Johnson and Jacques Baud. First, Larry Johnson's interview. In his recent episode of Dialogue Works, Nima engaged with Larry Johnson, a seasoned geopolitical analyst, in a conversation that spans various pressing international issues. The dialogue delved into the complexities of global politics, military strategy, and the intricate web of international relations. The conversation opened with remarks from leaders in Serbia and Hungary expressing concern about a potential world war, and NATO's military intentions in Ukraine. Johnson provided a critical analysis of NATO's actions, suggesting that while there is bellicose rhetoric, tangible actions such as military mobilization across Europe have not been observed. He emphasized the absence of a warning order, which would indicate a serious preparation for deployment against Russia. Johnson critiqued NATO's current stance, pointing out the discrepancy between aggressive statements and the actual readiness of troops. He introduced the concept of tip fiddle, a time-phased process for troop activation and deployment, which historically takes considerable time to execute, as seen in the lead up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The discussion touched upon the provision of military aid to Ukraine, with Johnson expressing skepticism about the effectiveness of the supplied weaponry. He highlighted the depletion of Western military stockpiles and the limited impact of the weapons on the ground in Ukraine. Johnson provided insights into Russia's military strategy, noting an increase in Ukrainian casualties and the unsustainable attrition rate. He discussed the training requirement for military personnel, emphasizing that there are no shortcuts to proper preparation. The conversation shifted to the debate about over-supplying F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. Johnson predicted that if deployed, these jets would likely be destroyed by Russian forces, potentially escalating the conflict further. Nima questioned the rationale behind Norway, Sweden, and Finland's decision to create a military transport corridor. Johnson interpreted this as a casus belli, potentially provoking Russia and creating a new military threat on its border. The dialogue also covered Putin's diplomatic visits to North Korea and Vietnam. Johnson analyzed these trips as strategic moves to strengthen military alliances and send a message to the nations, particularly South Korea and Japan, against further support of the Ukrainian regime. Johnson critiqued comments made by the president of Finland and Poland at the summit in Switzerland, which he viewed as a desperate attempt by the West to rewrite the narrative of World War II and suggest unrealistic plan for the quote-unquote decolonization of Russia. The conversation concluded with analysis of the conflict in Gaza. Johnson opined that the Israeli political dynamics and the potential consequences of military actions against Hezbollah. Johnson critiques the Israeli government tactics, suggesting an inclination towards escalation rather than resolution. The resignation of opposition members from Israel's war cabinet is a harbinger of potentially more reckless operations in southern Lebanon. Johnson also hints at a brewing conflict within Israel between political leaders and the IDF, which could lead to unpredictable outcomes. The dialogue between Nima and Larry Johnson on Dialogue Works provided a comprehensive overview of the current geopolitical tensions. Johnson's analysis offered a sobering perspective on the realities of military strategy, the limitations of NATO's posturing, and the broader implications of international relations in today's volatile world. Now let's move on to Nima's interview with Jacques Baud. In the realm of international relations, few conflicts have been as enduring and complex as the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. Jacques Baud's recent interview provides a profound examination of the ceasefire resolution adopted by the UN Security Council intended to halt the hostilities in Gaza. His insights offer a window into the labyrinth of international diplomacy and the ideological undercurrents that influence it. Listener warning. Jacques Baud's analysis of the ongoing crisis in Gaza can be challenging to follow due to his extensive and elaborate explanations throughout the interview. Let's begin. Baud begins by highlighting the apparent unity between the U.S. and Israel, as presented by the U.S. ambassador to the UN. This semblance of solidarity, however, is swiftly undermined by the Israeli ambassador's refusal to engage with Hamas. Such a contradiction within the Western alliance exposes the challenges of formulating a cohesive strategy for peace. The resolution initially proposed by Hamas suggested a phased approach to a permanent ceasefire. Yet, the U.S.'s version, which excluded enforceable timelines, raises questions about the sincerity of the commitment to peace. Baud likens this to the Oslo Agreement, where the absence of deadlines led to perpetual delays in recognizing the Palestinian state, thus prolonging the conflict. Bott argues that Israel may be miscalculating the impact of its actions on its international reputation. The growing isolation, even within the Jewish community, suggests a disconnect between the implementation of Zionism and the values it purports to represent. Bott posits that the negative aspects of Zionism are overshadowing its positive intentions, threatening Israel's viability as a nation. The interview also touches upon the portrayal of Hamas. Bott challenges the prevailing narrative of their malevolence, citing shifts in media perceptions that question the veracity of accusations against the group. This change in narrative is crucial for understanding the conflict's dynamics and global response to Israel's actions. Bott emphasizes the role of international law and humanitarian law in war contexts. The involvement of multiple countries with the International Court of Justice in addressing allegations of genocide in Gaza underscores the significance of adhering to these laws. Should Israel persist on its current trajectory, Bott warns of severe repercussions. The risk of being labeled genocidal carries implications for arms trades, diplomatic relations, and support for movements like BDS. This potential designation could profoundly affect Israel's international standing. Ultimately, Bodd's commentary is a call for introspection and behavioral change from Israel. He advocates for a shift towards humane values and justice, aligning with the principles of human dignity and international law. This change, he argues, is essential for resolving the conflict and improving Israel's global image. Jacques Bodd's interview offers a sobering perspective on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the broader implications of Israel's actions. His analysis calls for strategic clarity and reevaluation of policies and perceptions. As the world grapples with the complexities of this enduring conflict, Bodd's insights remind us of the importance of just resolutions that respect the rights and dignity of all parties. Okay, now let's go on to Danny Haifang's interview with Scott Ritter. In a world increasingly interconnected yet paradoxically divided, the recent dialogue between Scott Ritter and a former UN weapons inspector and Danny Haifang, an independent journalist, sheds light on the complexities of international relations and the shifting sands of global power dynamics. Their conversation, occurring against the backdrop of heightened tensions between superpowers, delves into the intricacies of diplomacy, sanctions, and the enduring quest for sovereignty. Ritter and Haifang's exchange begins with a critical examination of the United States' diplomatic maneuvers, particularly in relation to China. The dialogue unfolds as they scrutinize the visit of U.S. officials to China, juxtaposing it against the prevailing skepticism amongst experts regarding the efficacy of such diplomatic overtures. The conversation reveals a shared sentiment of disillusionment with the current state of diplomacy, where optimism is scarce and realpolitik reigns supreme. Central to the discussion is the theme of economic sanctions, a tool frequently wielded by the United States to exert pressure on nations like Russia and China. Ritter articulates the counterproductive nature of sanctions, highlighting the failure to achieve intended outcomes and their propensity to backfire. He argues that sanctions often strengthen rather than weaken the resolve and economic resilience of targeted nations. This perspective is particularly poignant in light of the sanctions imposed on Russia following its actions in Ukraine, which, contrary to expectation, did not cripple the Russian economy. The dialogue further explores the burgeoning strategic partnership between China and Russia, a relationship that has deepened in response to Western policies. Ritter emphasizes the futility of attempting to sever this alliance through sanctions, pointing out the public and private commitments that bind the two nations. Haifang echoes this sentiment, noting the significant investments and initiatives such as the Belt and Road that have fortified China's global economic influence. A recurring theme in the conversation is the perceived decline of American global dominance. Both speakers reflect on the United States' diminishing ability to dictate international affairs, as evidenced by growing economic might of China and the strategic acumen of Russia. They lament the U.S.'s continued reliance on sanctions and its failure to adapt to a multipolar world where its unilateral actions are increasingly met with resistance and alternative strategies. In concluding their dialogue, Ritter and Haifang contemplate the future of global politics. They advocate for reevaluation of American foreign policy, urging a shift from confrontation to cooperation. The conversation ends with a call for introspection and a plea for the United States to embrace a role that contributes positively to the international community rather than perpetuating cycles of conflict and instability. Now let's go to Garland Nixon's monologue. This monologue presents a sober reflection on the state of the United States, painting a picture of an empire in decline. Through his eyes, we see a nation that once stood as a beacon of opportunity and economic stability, now grappling with the harsh realities of economic decay and social stagnation. Nixon reminisces about the 1980s, a time when jobs were abundant and the American dream seemed within reach for the average family. He contrasts this with the present, where even modest luxuries have become unattainable for many. The jobs that teenagers once took as stepping stones are now occupied by adults and seniors struggling to make ends meet. This shift, according to Nixon, is a symptom of a larger problem, the unraveling of the American empire. The monologue delves into the theme of propaganda and its role in masking the contradictions of society that proclaims democracy while practicing neoliberal totalitarianism. Nixon argues that people are less concerned with abstract ideals like freedom and liberty and more with tangible outcomes that improve their lives. The disconnect between the promise of democracy and the reality experienced by many is a recurring motif in his discourse. Nixon also touches on the loss of sovereignty and independence in Europe, where private interests have overtaken governments, leading to a homogenized system devoid of true national identities. This critique extends to the United States, where he suggests that the government no longer serves the people but caters to a wealthy elite with no allegiance to any country. This transnational group exploits resources and labor across the globe for personal gain, a stark departure from the imperialistic practices of the past, while exploitative, at least benefited the citizens of the empire. The decline of democracy is central to Nixon's argument. He posits that the democratic process has failed to yield governments that represent the will and welfare of the people. Instead, the system enriches a select few at the expense of the many, leading to an erosion of trust in government and the rise of authoritarian measures to suppress dissent. Nixon's distrust of the government is palpable. He views it as an authoritarian oligarchy that prioritizes global resource acquisition over domestic stability. This shift in focus, he warns, may lead to a decline in the standard of living and a growing contempt for countries like the U.S., which once promised democracy but now exhibit signs of authoritarian control. The monologue concludes with a call to action, urging support for independent channels that challenge the status quo. Nixon responds to audience questions on various topics, including international relations and the potential formation of an anti-imperialistic bloc by countries like China and Russia. He critiques former leaders for their lack of idealism and vulnerability to external influences, and acknowledges the concepts of BRICS as a potential counterbalance to Western hegemony. In essence, Garland-Nixon's monologue is a poignant commentary on the current state of the United States and its place in the world. It is a narrative of decline, a cautionary tale of what happens when a government loses sight of its purpose to serve its people, and instead becomes a tool for the few to exploit the many. The unraveling of the American empire, as described by Nixon, is not just a crisis of economics or politics, but a crisis of identity and values, challenging us to rethink the meaning of democracy and the role of government in our lives. Now let's go on to Katie Halper's extended interview with Mark Lamont and Brianna Gray. In an illuminating session hosted by Katie Halper, the conversation with Brianna Joy Gray and Mark Lamont Hill transcended the usual discourse, venturing into the realms of media integrity, political activism, and the repercussions of speaking out on certain contentious issues. Mark Lamont Hill, a distinguished cultural anthropologist and vocal advocate for Palestinian rights, shared his narrative, one that is emblematic of the challenges faced by those in the spotlight who dare to address controversial topics. Hill's dismissal from CNN followed his United Nations speech advocating for Palestinian liberation was a focal point of the discussion. His call for a free Palestine from the river to the sea was met with swift and severe consequences, leading to his termination from the network. This incident not only shed light on the volatility of media positions, but also the intense external pressure that can dictate the boundaries of permissible discourse. The dialogue further explored the impact of Hill's advocacy on his academic tenure at Temple University, the backlash from the Board of Trustees, and the absurdity of being criticized by Bill Cosby's personal attorney underscored the broader implications for academic freedom. Hill's experience revealed the extent to which outspoken academics can be targeted and the lengths institutions will go to silence them. Halper and Gray probed into the concept of manufactured outrage, a tactic used to suppress dissenting voices. Hill's ordeal with Temple University, where he faced a barrage of orchestrated complaints, demonstrated how organized campaigns can influence individual careers and limit free speech. A significant revelation from the conversation was the existence of a silent majority within media and academia, individuals who privately express support but publicly remain mute due to fear of reprisal. This culture of intimidation effectively silences potential allies and perpetuates a cycle of self-censorship. The trio discussed the politics of fear that pervades media and academia, where even tenured professors hesitate to speak out. Hill's anecdotes about colleagues at CNN and academics who offered private support but shied away from public solidarity highlighted the effectiveness of the strategies employed to instill fear and maintain control. The interview with Katie Halper, Hill, and Gray serves as a clarion call for solidarity and courage in the face of institutional pressures. It underscores the urgent need for a systemic change within our societal institutions and the importance of standing together against the mechanisms of control that threaten our fundamental freedoms. Lastly, let's go to Cyrus Jensen's recent report on Malaysia's recent decision to join BRICS network, which closely following Thailand's announcement is a testament to the shifting geopolitical landscape. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim of Malaysia has made it clear that the era of Western dominance is over, and independent nations are now seeking a more balanced and equitable global stage. This move by Malaysia, the sixth largest economy in the Southeast Asia alongside Thailand, represents a significant addition to the BRICS alliance, both economically and geopolitically. The strategic importance of Malaysia's accession can be traced back to the Strait of Malacca, a crucial maritime route for global trade and particularly for China's oil imports. The strait's vulnerability to blockades poses a significant risk to China's economy, as seen in the recent Suez Canal crisis, which caused a drastic reduction in trade through the canal and forced shipping companies to revert to ancient trade routes around Africa. China's strategic response has been to strengthen ties with Malaysia and other ASEAN nations, ensuring regional dominance and securing trade routes. China's influence in Asia has grown exponentially, with trade between China and ASEAN increasing by 106% over 7 years, making ASEAN China's top trading partner. Investments like the East Coast Rail link in Malaysia have solidified China's influence in the region. The public perception in Malaysia is largely in favor of alignment with China, and the 50-year anniversary of China-Malaysia diplomatic relations has further cemented their partnership. Economically, joining BRICS offers Malaysia benefits such as insulation from U.S. monetary policy and reduced currency volatility, fostering a more stable and predictable market. The collective effort of BRICS members to reduce reliance on the U.S. dollar in trade and increase the U.S. use of local currencies will likely strengthen Malaysia's currency over time. In conclusion, Malaysia's ascension to BRICS signifies a strategic pivot towards a multipolar world order where economic and political alliances are diversified and reliance on traditional power is diminished. This move reflects a broader trend of countries seeking alternatives to Western-centric systems, diversifying Malaysia's economic partnerships, enhancing BRICS leverage in Southeast Asia, and potentially redefining global trade and currency markets. The world is rapidly changing, and Malaysia's decision to join BRICS is a clear indication of the evolving geopolitical dynamics. All right, and that's it for today's episode. Be sure again to go back to each of these interviews and watch them in their entirety. That way you can get as much out of them as you can. And again, if you appreciate these summaries, if you don't mind liking this episode and maybe sharing it with your friends, that help grow this channel. Thanks so much.